Hi, UNL. My name is Lucy Mahaffey, and I recently graduated from the University of Nottingham with a master's in politics and international relations. And during my time there, I did a deep dive on one state's response to human trafficking. But before I dive into all of my findings, I really want to thank the conference planning team. They've done a phenomenal job pulling everything together in spite of COVID. I also really want to thank my two supervisors, Dr. Kevin Bales and Dr. Allison Gardner from the Rights Lab at the University of Nottingham for making my research possible. I also really want to thank the 40 Oklahomans that supported me with my research in surveys and interviews and that shared their lived experience. They continue to make Oklahoma a better place every day, and I'm very grateful to them. So without further ado, my research focused on three key questions. What is the nature of human trafficking in Oklahoma? Who's currently responding and how? And what gaps are there in this response? And within all of this, I had three key aims. I was trying to consolidate, kind of give an overview of the data on human trafficking in the state. I was also trying to map all of the partnerships that existed, because some of them are very spread out and not communicating. And I was also trying to make recommendations for the state so that moving forward, we could do a better job of responding. I'm very happy to say that since this research was finalized last year, I've actually co-authored a white paper with the 3 certified shelters and the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women. And we sent this to both the governor and to the state legislature. And without giving too much away, there's a lot of public facing as well as more internal changes and discussions happening on human trafficking response. So watch this space. So just to be kind of very clear, because we're looking at a lot of different types of human trafficking and a lot of different contexts, this kind of conference, I wanted to make sure everyone knew I'm using the US human trafficking law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And in this law, it equates human trafficking with modern slavery. And within all of this, I'm actually using Oklahoma's state law, which very closely mirrors the national one, but actually goes a step further. And it says just because the victims consented initially doesn't mean the trafficker can go free. And I really want to highlight survivor-informed definitions because although they haven't been used in the past, they're beginning to be used. And it's absolutely critical to center lived experience and expertise of survivors in responses to human trafficking. And hopefully moving forward, Oklahoma and Nebraska can do that much, much more. So just to be very upfront about what I did, I looked at over 100 different documents across the state. I also surveyed over 30 participants, including tribal governments, health organizations, nonprofits, shelters, and law enforcement. I also interviewed about 10 of these in much more depth. So I'm very fortunate that I've been working in Oklahoma for a few years. So I actually had a really strong referral network. However, because of COVID and time restraints, I was unable to interview any survivors. So that's definitely a weakness, which I'm working to remedy in hopefully very soon research. It's also limited. I don't want to say any of this applies to Nebraska or a different context. This is Oklahoma specific, but you can definitely learn lessons from this. I also want to make sure everyone knows, and I'm sure you do, data changes very quickly. So anything I have listed here that I found in the past year or two might already have changed by now. And just to be very upfront with everyone, this research was funded by the British government. I'm currently on a scholarship for 2 years in the UK. And I'm very grateful to be able to do this. So what exactly did I do? Well, I looked at broader responses and then I really honed in on Oklahoma's response. And historically, human trafficking response has been much more top-down and national, up until about 2010, where the focus started to shift. And very specifically in 2018, the US Trafficking in Persons Report was specifically titled Local Responses to a Global Problem. So we really saw things shift then. And while we may not always be able to directly apply things to different contexts, it's really important to have them in mind For instance, Houston has a great example as a city of how they're responding. They have a 95-point plan, and they work directly with the city government, as well as nonprofits, funders, all sorts of different task forces as well. And so Oklahoma is not Houston, and Oklahoma is not Nebraska, but it's important to have that context. In fact, Oklahoma has a very distinct context. And I was actually surprised to learn that it was double the population of Nebraska, roughly. However, we have a smaller landmass. We also have many more Oklahomans that are Native American than either the US or Nebraska by percentage. We also, unfortunately, have the highest female incarceration rate in the world per capita, and we are ranked very low on a lot of other things and social issues. But I thought it was very important to be upfront and say that we have a lot of oil rigs and we have a lot of casinos that are owned by tribes, as well as 38 different tribal governments, because this all provides a context for some questions we were facing for human trafficking response. We were wondering, does tribal jurisdiction matter? Does that complicate things? Are there instances of human trafficking in oil rigs? Are there instances of human trafficking in casinos? And I'll describe some of the findings about these later. But you can kind of see, compare and contrast how this might be similar or dissimilar from your own context. So in short, there are a lot of tribal jurisdictions. Just wanted you to see a visual. It's very important to kind of recognize, especially since the Supreme Court decision last year, that these jurisdictions really matter. And 46% of Oklahomans are actually in what's considered tribal jurisdiction now. And it is a layer of federal, state, local, tribal, on how they can respond to issues of human trafficking, exploitation, any sort of kind of violence as well. So before my study, I did a lot of groundwork of what already exists. What do we know? So Oklahoma's not the best or the worst for laws on human trafficking, although we actually have a very unique law to any other state because it's very, very broadly applicable to supporting victims and defending them. As far as response, we have 3 certified shelters, and that's unique. Oklahoma requires adult sex trafficking service providers to get certified. So we have 3 very specific victim service providers for adult sex trafficking victims. We also have 3 key law enforcement, and I thought we had 1 task force. Most organizations I worked with thought we had 1 task force. Turns out we have 2 task forces, and a 3rd one was just formed at the border. And I also dive into kind of the last couple decades of history in response. We don't have to go into that now, but if anyone's curious and wants something very in-depth, let me know. As far as data, I also want to know what existed, and we based a lot of our data on the National Hotline. And a lot of people in a 2015 survey thought the majority of victims were white, but I'm going to explain why that's important later. So it's later. Actually, unfortunately, after crunching 4 different data sets, and I'm the first person that's done this to my knowledge, these data sets showed that Native American Oklahomans and Black Oklahomans are hugely disproportionately impacted by human trafficking. And as a state, we haven't started asking, okay, why? Why is this the case, and what can we do about it? It's also really important to note that all of these cases are very specific. These are between 2011 and 2018, and they're adult female sex trafficking cases. So that's what the data we have tells us. There is no data on labor trafficking, and it's also more complicated because law enforcement does not share their data. And fortunately, victim service providers do collaborate, and that's helped clarify some things, especially in the last few years. But it's a very tricky, kind of layered process. Also, this data actually helps tackle some stereotypes that we had, because 1 in every 3 victims are actually referring themselves to services. That's not coming through law enforcement. That's not coming through healthcare. Some of it's coming through social services, but a lot of victims are referring themselves. Also, only 9% were not born in the US. So the majority of these victims are American citizens. That's not to say this data is perfect. It's probably leaving out a ton of people that just aren't reporting and that aren't getting services, which is very unfortunate. But based off of what we do have, this is what we know. And the average age is about 28 years old, which I think also counteracts a stereotype because a lot of us tend to think that these victims might be a bit younger. So, as I said earlier, yes, the tribal jurisdictions really do matter, and there are lots of layers of how people are able to respond within that. And the recent Supreme Court decision has really impacted Oklahoma, and a lot of it's actually uncertain right now in how some entities can respond. Some participants said they're checkerboard jurisdictions, which I thought was very helpful to kind of visualize. Also, while I can't speak to Nebraska or to other state contexts where this has been reported, Oklahoma has not seen any cases of oil rig trafficking at all in the last 30 years. And I really want to emphasize that because I think it's really blown up in the media, and it has been reported in some states and some areas, but statewide in Oklahoma, nobody I've chatted with has seen it. Also, there are instances of trafficking in casinos. It's actually more common, but they're not particularly frequent. And law enforcement emphasized that to me. They said, this does exist, and it creates problems for jurisdictions and who can respond, but it isn't super frequent. So what else I did in this is I actually mapped out 47 groups that respond to human trafficking in the state. And this is the first time I think anyone has ever done this. And they're across 13 different categories. So you're welcome to look at that. But the thing I want to emphasize in this is some groups within the same city didn't even know they existed and don't communicate. And on top of this, you can see, and this is particularly relevant for Nebraska, I think, there are two places where all of the resources are clustered, in Oklahoma City and Tulsa in Oklahoma. And we've got to do better about spreading out our resources. And I have a hunch Nebraska might be similar, but I haven't interviewed or talked with anyone in the state, so I don't know. But it was very eye-opening to see all of these really clustered. So out of all of this, I created a lot of recommendations along with the co-authors of that white paper. But the ones I want to focus on are in the response section. Every single organization and group and person I talked with wanted better communication in the state. They didn't just want a hotline for victims, although we have some of those, but they really wanted a way to talk with other responders and a more clear, succinct way to do that. Lots of ideas passed around about how. Another thing I want to highlight is collaboration, because the state and basically the tribal responses and resources were very distinctly different than the non-tribal resources and responses. And there's been a lot of effort to bridge that over the last few years, but it's not where anyone wants it to be. Everyone is very, very eager for that kind of to continue to improve and for it to be more collaborative. But there's a very distinctive split, not just with law enforcement response, but also with victim service provider response. And just two things about the data. We've got to get better at data in Oklahoma. I have a hunch this applies lots of places, but we have no labor trafficking data. And second, we've got to start asking, why are Black and Native Oklahomans disproportionately trafficked? So out of everything, there are kind of 6 really kind of lessons learned that I hope Oklahoma and possibly Nebraska, if it's relevant to you, can learn from. One is just changing 2 words in our labor trafficking law. Right now, the law is set up where law enforcement can only prosecute and go after a case if they catch it in 3 years of it happening. If we could change that to from discovery, they would have 3 years from finding out about it. Because right now, if they found out about it 2 years down the line, they'd only have a year or less to try to finalize everything. 2, we've got to get better at data. In particular, we've got to get better at sharing data, hopefully, especially with law enforcement. 3, most people in the state thought only one task force existed, but actually there are 3. A third one was formed while I was doing this research at the border. And so I really hope we can get better about spreading awareness and collaborating, because these task forces are tackling so many things. 4th, kind of tied in with the task force note, is everyone wants better communication, whether it's a newsletter or check-ins or database. And so I'm hoping as a community, we can really come together to pinpoint the key things that we want to focus on. Fifth, and I think this is particularly important to Nebraska as well as Oklahoma, is survivors' voices. We must get better at centering survivors' voices because very few groups in Oklahoma are actively incorporating survivors into policy and decision making. And there are actually lots of resources at survivoralliance.org if anyone you know is looking to support survivors and really center them on task forces and decision making. And sixth, and I hope that we can kind of maybe even mirror Houston in this, is to make a strategic plan. So everyone kind of knows where we're going, what we want to accomplish, and what we need over the next 2 or however many year period. So that was a lot of information about kind of my deep dive, and it's 102 pages if you want to read it. But if you don't, I've made a 1-page summary of key lessons learned and takeaways. And if you're interested in that or communicating with me about any questions or comments or ideas for future research, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much again to UNL and to everyone attending this. And I hope that you stay well.